Alice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alice Popovich. I'm from the Center on Media, Crime, and Justice, and I will give you some instructions on how to ask questions, and then we'll leave it to Caddy Gray. So you'll see, if you look on the right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a chat bar where you can type your question, and you can just type it there if you have any questions, or you can also email me your questions at alice@thecrimereport.org. So that's ALICE at thecrimereport.org. And this video chat will be available on the CMCJ network this evening. So now we will just go to Caddy Gray. Hello,
Hi,
Caddy.
everybody. I hope that y'all are well. Thanks again for all your great work on this topic. Y'all sort of know the drill here today. I am moderating. The speakers will give a few introductory remarks, and we'll fire away the questions from there. And I look forward to hearing y'all's questions, etc. So today the discussion is the new Intercept model, how it eyes better care for criminal justice involved persons with co-occurring mental illness and drug addiction. Our guests are Debbie Plotnick, Vice President for Mental Health and Systems Advocacy at Mental Health America, Florida Judge Ginger Lerner Wren, who launched the first mental health court in the country there in Broward County, is an activist and pioneer in this area. And also we have Catherine Steves, who is forensics case manager for, Catherine.
Henderson Behavioral Health.
Henderson Behavioral Health. She is also a consumer. She is a product of the mental health courts. She'll tell you part of her personal story and how she got to where she is in her management role. So, Judge, if you would start out your remarks, and then we'll go to Debbie and then to Catherine. Thanks.
Thank you, Caddy. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody that's participating in this webinar, and congratulations on your fellowships. I cannot think of a more vital and important area, first of all, in the context of civil rights and health equity than the area of mental health and criminal justice. And I am a Broward County court judge. I have two divisions. One is a regular criminal division, and one is the mental health court that is part-time. It's voluntary, and it was established, believe it or not, almost 20 years ago. It was established in June of 1997 based on a number of precipitating problems that you all, quite frankly, more than likely are investigating and hearing about in all of the various jurisdictions that you may be working in. And that is, of course, the trend that we know so well as the criminalization of people with mental illnesses and co-occurring substance use disorders. And so it's really an honor to be here. It is an honor to help you deconstruct sequential intercept mapping. It's a really long word for a relatively simple tool, but what's not simple about it are the problems that need to be solved through that process, given the lack of funding and priority in terms of mental health policy that we have that has really plagued our country for so many decades. And so, again, it is my honor to be here. Broward's Mental Health Court is, as Caddy mentioned, the first in the nation. We don't receive any money. We were the model for the federal legislation under President Clinton in 2000 that actually passed the Law Enforcement Mental Health Project Act. And so while our court was the model, we never got any funding, which is okay for us. And our court works, of course, on a collaborative process, and we use existing resources. We've got tremendous shared vision in our community. I kind of joke, or not so much joke, that I believe that Broward County has one of the greatest mental health criminal justice collaboratives on the planet. And so with that, I think that the court has been a very important innovation it's therapeutically driven, clinically led. And if we talk about, when we really get to the nuts and bolts of the MAP per se, you will note that the mental health court is a problem-solving court, and it would be, I guess, technically speaking, in phase 2. Phase 2 of the sequential Intercept MAP, meaning that it is a post-booking strategy. So I think, Hattie, I think that's good for now, and
Okay.
we'll move forward.
Sure, we'll peel some of that back as we go on. So Debbie?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, Katty. Thank you to my good friend, Judge Ginger, and a pleasure to see Catherine today. I'm Debbie Plotnick, and I'm, as Katty said, Vice President of Mental Health and Systems Advocacy for Mental Health America. And Mental Health America is the nation's oldest mental health advocacy organization. We'll be celebrating our 107th birthday later on this, actually next month, February 19th is our 107th birthday. We have affiliates all over the country. We're first and foremost advocacy organizations, but many of our affiliates are also service providers. They often provide outreach services to folks in communities, including certified peer specialists, and you'll hear more about that from Catherine. But let me just review, Judge Ginger talked a little bit about how her court, not only the innovative first one, but is in the second level of the sequential Intercept model. If anybody's not familiar with the model, the first Intercept is with police. So it's to train first responders. And usually the first responders are in fact police departments. Sometimes they're campus police or transit police. So they follow a model known as the Memphis model with crisis intervention team training. And they're the most commonly found part of the model. Secondly, the second most commonly used part of the model are mental health courts like Judge Ginger's. However, as she said, there are many models across the country. Some of them are only post-conviction models. Some of them are actual diversion models. We know that when services are cut in the community, we know this from naturalistic experiments like through a good friend of mine, Judge Dan Eisenstein in Tennessee, that when services were cut, when budgets were cut and people didn't get community services, more folks got in trouble with the law and ended up in his criminal courtroom. So we know that we need to have all of the pieces. The third part of, Alice, is there a problem? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
very good, because all of a sudden I can see you big time, so I thought you were speaking. The third part of the model after the courts is getting services to people once they're inside the system, and I know we'll hear more about that from Catherine. And then the parts that the fifth part, the fourth part inside, the fifth part, getting people from inside to outside, and that's where forensic peer specialists come in, and that gets a little less attention, but it's a very important part. And the most important part where we're not getting a lot of activity, but we really need more, as communities map, they'll see that this is the place where there's needs to be even more done, actually needs them all in all the places, but that is what happens when people are coming from the inside to the outside and doing things that really help people be well and prevent recidivism. And we're seeing big leaps happening in that area where we're realizing that if we get states to not turn off Medicaid, which they can choose to do when people are in prison, help them set up their benefits for when they're coming out and get them services and supports on the outside. There are some courts also, to give you another variation of courts, like the one in Milwaukee, where even in parole and back into the community, people are still supervised by courts, and that's another variation in the model. So as you can see, there are a lot of variations in the country, but really what it takes is the entire community. And when mapping happens, and I had the good fortune when I was with our MHA affiliate in southeastern Pennsylvania to be part of the Philadelphia Area Forensic Task Force, which was composed of state representatives, county representatives, folks in the prison systems, both county and state, as well as the service providers, community providers, clergy, consumer providers. So really bringing together a large coalition. And to fully implement the sequential intercept model properly, you really need that community effort. And there are a number of cities around the country and localities that are really doing a great job. So I'm going to stop there, Katty.
Sure. Thank you so much. Catherine, please.
Okay. Hi, my name is Catherine Steves, and before we really discuss my role in the mental health and criminal justice field, I would like to inform all of you that first and foremost, I am a consumer of mental health services and have experienced firsthand how treatment instead of incarceration can and does work. I was undiagnosed and severely unstable, which included symptoms such as confusion, hopelessness, psychotic features, and hopelessness. I was unable to manage my life, and not knowing or caring about any consequences, I engaged in multiple illegal activities, mainly petty theft from retail stores, and not because I needed anything that I stole. I mean, I was homeless, so I didn't have anywhere to put anything, but more so because the thrill of getting away with it. The last time, it made me feel good. It made me feel important and not so hopeless. For example, the last time I was arrested was for stealing 5 harmonicas. I mean, who needs 1 harmonica, let alone 5? Okay, so if that just gives you any idea of my frame of thinking. I wasn't speaking to any of my family. My ex-husband had taken my children from me. I wasn't speaking to my boyfriend or my friends. And I continued on this role of destruction and destructive behaviors until I was linked with Judge Wren's court and her therapeutic treatment. Somebody, after being arrested and being put on pretrial release, identified that there was something more going on with me than just bad behavior. So that is the key to this mapping process, and that's identifying early on before there's more charges and more severe consequences, and guiding you into the right and appropriate treatment and court. My experience happened in 1998 through 2000, which was early on and what I considered the birth of the treatment instead of incarceration. I ended up in Judge Wren's courtroom and in her diversionary treatment residential program. It was called Cottages in the Pines. And that is where my life was saved. They saved my life. They changed my attitude, my beliefs, and my goals, and all because one person, just one is all it took, identified my needs and guided me in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That's a perfect segue. As we sort of peel back just this construct from a sort of ABC 1, 2, 3 perspective, would you start by saying how you came into the court, how your mental illness was diagnosed, if you would take us through that process, who you worked with, and how that happened?
Well, before I was actually diagnosed, my first husband and I had gotten a divorce, and he used my unstable times against me in court when we were in custody battle. And he would use that, and they would tell me, ma'am, you need therapy, ma'am, you need to get help. And, you know, I basically told them all where they could go, you know, because I didn't believe it. I had a job for 15 years and ran a restaurant, and I just thought I had the world going for me. But there were a lot of bad times and struggles, and my ex-husband took my kids from me. And that really was the beginning of my downfall.
And
So,
how were you diagnosed? What was going on with you at the point of diagnosis?
well, I wanted to hurt myself. I was getting into legal trouble. I was ending up with charges against me for theft and petty theft, and I was being told that one more and I would be a habitual offender, and my husband took my kids, so I wanted to hurt myself. And then I decided, because the dependency judge had told me that I needed treatment, I wanted to prove them wrong. So I ended up checking myself, checking myself into a one of our Baker Act facilities, and then I was, by pretrial release, she identified that I needed some help. And that's where they referred me to Henderson Cottages in the Pines, and I was like very, very resistant. But this one gentleman, Dr. Tim Ludwig, agreed to take me in, and he facilitated, along with the pretrial release officer, to get me into Judge Wren's court.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how I got in front of Judge Wren's court.
Can if I can just jump in, one of our, I'm reading an email from one of our fellows, Nakanoy Ricker, who works in Bangor, Maine. She's getting ready to publish a 2-part series, and she wrote in the note to me that Catherine's story is so telling and so illustrative for the work that she's doing. Judge Ginger, if you would start there, if you would just sort of, from your place on the bench, what you saw in Catherine, and if her story is illustrative for so many, how so?
You know, it is. And, you know, our view, when we visualized a mental health court, we really didn't even think, Caddy, quite frankly, about the fact whether there was one, whether there wasn't one. Our community wanted to stand up. It recognized that, you know, our state of Florida has no Medicaid expansion. We're the 3rd largest state in the country. We have always been chronically underfunded, and we were just coming off of a grand jury investigation in the mid-90s. And so we had a few leaders within our judiciary, and our lead public defender at the time, and our community formed a task force. We didn't have the sequential mapping in formal terms, but we had the sequential mapping in informal terms, meaning we really went through the same process, looking overall at the criminal justice system versus what's happening or not happening in the community. And we understood that, and I think it's important for the fellows to recognize, and Debbie, I think this will really resonate, that before the mental health court, largely, there were 2 very, very different, independent, parallel systems of care. One being the mental, or systems, period. One being the criminal justice system, operating in its silo, and one being the mental health system, for whatever it was in any community, operating independently of one another. They didn't interface, they didn't talk, they didn't do planning together, they didn't work together in any way. And it was really through our community's task force process, our work group that we put together, that really kind of went through all of the system dialogues to see where and how could Broward County intercept individuals coming into our jail system. Our jail system was experiencing overcrowding. We were under a federal class action in Broward County, as many other jail systems are experiencing these kinds of pressures and tensions. And so we really recognized that our mental health court knew that consumers, that citizens like Catherine, weren't getting the help they needed in the community, that they were largely marginalized, that these people had been neglected, that they've been just endlessly revolving from jails to homeless shelters to emergency rooms to the streets, back to emergency rooms, back to the streets, back to jails, and that we really wanted the court to be a refuge. We wanted to create a refuge, a sanctuary, because unfortunately, while most people, with untreated mental illness may end up in the doorsteps of the criminal justice system through and jails, most judges and lawyers are not trained.
Judge, let me, if I could
Sure.
interrupt you for just a second.
Please.
2 things. There are 10 or so fellows on this webinar. Alice needs to give you all an instruction about how to get your questions through. So,
Please.
Alice.
Yes. Hi, everyone. If you're signed into the CMCJ Fellows page, if you have not signed in, please do so. You'll see a bar at the bottom, and you can type in your questions to me there. Or you can email your questions to me at alice@thecrimereport.org, and that's ALICE@thecrimereport.org. We already have one question or a couple of questions.
Before we take that, Alice, I wanted to ask the judge this. Who are the players at the table? Who are the various agencies in Broward County that are a part of this work group and who are there in your courtroom day to day?
Sure.
Court's in session, I'm sorry.
Sure. I mean, the stakeholders in any community are going to have to consist of all of the major criminal justice stakeholders. It's going to be in Broward County. It was the Broward Sheriff's Office, obviously the State Attorney's Office, the public defenders. It was the local consumer organizations, for example, Broward County NAMI was a very, very big proponent of the mental health
Alliance of Mental Illness. For those of you who are just criminal justice reporters who don't know that. Okay.
Correct. And we had some, major mental health providers from the community that were part of the task force. We had major mental health providers in the area of substance at the table. We had some legislators at the table,
Consumers.
which was extremely important, county human service administrators, and of course we had consumers at the table. And I think that it was, any stakeholders in this area that are impacted by mental health disorders and needs in the community, we tried to get. And our task force met for years. It took a really long time to reach consensus. For Broward County, it took almost 2 years, and I was not on the task force. I was a lawyer doing PAMI. I was a PAMI lawyer overseeing a federal class action of our local state hospital system in Broward County, and I was doing deinstitutionalization work for the Sanborn v. Childs federal class action at the time.
Alice, you want to take that question? We'll take from Alice.
Sure, we can do the question. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. First one is from Andrew. Andrew Oxford. Andrew works for the Taos News in New Mexico, and he asks, Debbie spoke about the importance of involving the entire, so again, the question is for Debbie. Debbie spoke about the importance of involving the entire community to create a complete model. But while the state judiciary has provided funding for drug courts here in Taos, my community lacks financially stable organizations to support many outpatient and inpatient mental health services. Does any community stick out to her as having a sustainable financial model that supports all stakeholders, nonprofit, governmental, private sector, etc.?
That's a great question. It's true that you have to have the entire community involved. You have to have involvement in, first of all, putting together the intercepts, and then the most important piece is that once you have folks, whether they're being diverted by way of the police teams or from the courts, there have to be the services in the community. And that's often the piece where things fall down. We may be able to recognize that we have a person in mental health crisis and bring them to a diversion that's just crisis. But without that continuum of care in the community, you will have the person cycling right back into crisis, whether that's being called, having the police called again, or having the person end up in court again, or worse, end up in jail. So I will tell you there are some communities, to answer your question, that are doing a good job. So straight away I will tell you I'm biased about my hometown of Philadelphia. They're doing a great job. They've really built out a continuum of care, and that's what you need. You need not only the coalition to get things off the ground, you need services all across in the community. You need, that's why, as Ginger had said, you bring the human services in there and you look at every piece of it. Are the people, do they have health insurance? That's the biggest piece. Are you able to provide services and supports? So they need their medical care. They also need vocational training. They need supports, perhaps peer supports, the kinds of things Catherine does. I will tell you that for other examples of looking at what's happening and how you build out a whole system, look at New York. The state of New York is doing a Medicaid redesign, and they are, again, putting in a soup to nuts. It is based on recovery. Catherine spoke about hope. The strongest component of recovery is hope. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to do a little bragging about my friend Ginger. She was on the President's New Freedom Commission back in the George W. Bush administration. There's really great if I recommend that the fellows look at this document. I'm sure you are familiar with it. It is very important that recovery be the place that we come from, that people in the community can do recover and live full lives, that they have all domains of life and they have the supports in them. So it's so they can have their medical needs met, they can have their social needs met, they can have their spiritual needs met, they can have their vocational needs met, they can have their needs for friendship met. And when you have a system that attends to all of these things, like you'll see in Philadelphia, like you'll see in New York, the state of Connecticut is another excellent example, and actually California has done a wonderful redesign where they move so far back as to be even looking at prevention of problems that they could see in youth and people in the communities.
Alice, you want to throw another one out?
Sure. We've got another question. Thank you, Debbie. And the next question, let me go to it, comes from Kelly Davis, who's a freelance reporter. It's not directed to anyone in particular, so whoever wants to take that. So Kelly asks, how does the Intercept model deal with mentally ill folks who've been arrested for violent crimes? That seems to be a problem here in San Diego. So many mentally ill offenders are excluded from treatment programs because they've committed a violent crime.
I think that's a great question. And I think that's an important question because the issue of decriminalization or diversion or alternative justice, you know, may not necessarily be for every offender. And there was a recent example, really a case study out of New York City just recently where you had a violent offender, for example, go into a drug court. He was early released pursuant to a drug court model and ended up shooting and killing a police officer out of New York. And I think that it's really important to understand that problem-solving courts or treatment courts, alternative justice, may not be for every offender. The issue of risk and risk management, quite frankly, Kelly, is a really, really, really huge issue, and it's something in my court. Risk management, you know, is one of the absolute priority considerations that we have, and I have a low-level court. But I learned very, very early on, and then I'm going to wrap up on this question just to give you an example, Kelly, is that the very first week that I opened up court, there was a young man who was arrested out of a local Denny's, and there was some disturbance in a Denny's restaurant. Well, I had released him we linked him with care in the community, and within 2 days we found out that he had just been discharged from a state hospital in Hawaii for murdering 2 people. And you know, we pulled this person right back into the criminal justice system faster than you could bat an eye. But it taught a very important lesson that risk must be evaluated, that it has to be properly assessed, responded to, and these courts may not be for everyone.
Can I add something here for a second with this? I mean, it brings us to a really important point that we have out in the world that we hear a lot about, and that it's incumbent on journalists to really help make this point. As Ginger had said, this gentleman had a history of violence, and we hear a lot about violence and we hear a lot about mental health, and that's what this question was about. But we know that the only way to predict violent acts reliably is people with a history of violence. Most folks who come into the criminal justice system with mental health issues are not violent, don't have histories of violence. So that's the thing. Even if there has been some low-level violence, still people benefit from treatment. But as Ginger said, you need to look very carefully if there is a previous history of violence.
Is there any data on how many of the folks nationally who come to mental health courts can be accommodated in a mental health court setting?
Do you mean accommodated in terms of how many people, how many slots there are in a court?
No, more their particular issues regarding the whole issue of risk to the public. How many can be well served, and public safety also be well served in the mental health court? You
know, and I want to go back to, yes, and I think I just want to go back to a couple of things. First of all, it's particularly in this environment of the president's executive order with regards to gun control and gun violence. I mean, very, very clearly, you know, the data and the evidence base is extremely well settled that the vast majority of individuals with serious mental illnesses are not violent. That in fact the data is very clear that more people with thought disorders and serious illnesses are vulnerable to violence and in fact end up getting victimized. So I want to make sure we start at that baseline, because the idea of journalists in terms of your perspective, in terms of how your writings, your work may impact social stigma. Is it going to enhance social stigma through your work, or is it going to actually try to mitigate stigma? Is that even something that you all think about as a fellow, as a public health writer, for example? And I hope you do. I really hope you do, because I will not. If anybody tries to call me from the press and they want me to comment, for example, on an issue that I perceive is going to in any way exacerbate social stigma, I choose not to participate in that. And so I want to throw it out. It's fundamental to your work, and I know that for the Carter Center, I'm sure it's a huge fidelity that is always in your consciousness. But I think that these courts are intended to be holistic. The idea of being able to leverage a court process, to use the perceived authority as a judge, to marshal scarce resource, to hold systems of care accountable to the person. That is a huge misconception of these courts. These courts are perceived by many to be there to hold an individual compliant to treatment. From my vantage point, that is not what these courts were about. These courts were about trying to hold systems of care that were medically provider-driven, that did not care about providing to the consumer. They didn't care about choice. They didn't care about sufficiency of service. So the idea of, in my view, we have no limit for the people that we see. We have no funding. It's a question of what can we do to use the court to marshal scarce resource, and quite frankly, we do the best that our providers can provide. Can we help everybody? Can we meet everybody's needs 100%? No, we may not be able to, but we try. And I think that every community's strengths and assets and what they have to offer across the continuum of care, as Debbie was talking about so wonderfully, you know, is what we have the inventory of through these courts. How we span the boundary of limited resources becomes the strength of this court process.
Right. Alice, before we do another question, Catherine, would you take us through your recovery? What kind of treatment you got, particularly in the Pines? How long that treatment lasted? You mentioned to me you went back to college. Just what has been your path?
Well, I mean that's very exciting to talk about for me. Okay, I embraced and look back on the beginning and how unstable I was, and I look at where I'm at today, and I think about the process. And the key to mine was a safe place, okay, which was the cottages, with the supported environment.
Safe place to live.
Right. It was a place to live, a safe place to live, not just a place to live. Okay, it was safe. I had individual therapy. Excuse me. I had individual therapy. I had group therapy. I had psychiatric, plus, you know, supervision from the staff there. And I was made accountable and had chores to do. But there's nothing that impacted me as much as my case manager. She was awesome. She still is awesome, and I know her still 20 years today.
She went to law school.
Yes. Yeah. She was actually studying law when she was a case manager, and she didn't take none of my junk. She put me front and foremost, and she asked me, you know, what is it I wanted to do? And I looked at her and I said, what you do, half joking. She said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do it the best I can. I was like, what? And so it was the push, the support, the guidance I got from that. It could be, you know, a case manager is a very important role in a person who can't manage their own life. And so that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I do today. I do what she did, and she's moved on now. She is a criminal defense attorney with her own practice now in Orlando, and I still keep in contact with her. I'll call her and I say, I need you to beat me up a little bit, and that's a joke because of course it was more guidance than anything.
Sure. Can you sort of paint a profile of the people who are on your caseload, both their diagnoses, the kind of treatment they're in, and also what they were faced with, potential criminal charges or criminal charges in the courts?
I have very few misdemeanor mental health court clients. Judge Wren's got that under wrap. She's got that courtroom going right. I work mainly in the felony mental health court, and it is a struggle. The court is not for everyone. It is not. My charges run from anywhere. My clients run anywhere from possession of cocaine to felony murder, capital homicide. Of course, depending, I mean, we monitor them because they often get sent to a forensic state hospital. We don't get them out of jail. That is not our purpose. When we develop what we call a conditional release plan, we identify what their history is, what their past charges have. I look up their past charges when I'm preparing this. I want them all out of jail, but it's not always the right thing to do. So I just make sure that they get the right evaluations and they get to the right place where they can get treatment in those particular cases. But most of my clients, I want them at home with their families, okay? And then we work on outpatient treatment. If that doesn't succeed, then I step it up a little bit to a residential treatment program. And I give them choices. I said, I can do this for you, or we can advocate for that for you. Which would you prefer? And I'll try their choice first. If that doesn't work, I have no problem going into the court and saying, this didn't work. We need to up it a little bit. So I think that is one of the biggest keys, is the defendant's choice, the client's choice, because you can't force somebody into treatment and have it work. They have to need it and want it. And some of the, conditions, like take your medication, that stuff is it's still a choice. They have a right to decline it, but they normally don't.
Sure. Alice?
Hi, we have another question from Kelly Davis, who's a freelance reporter based in California. Kelly asks, this question is for everyone. Have you had any opportunities to tour local jails to see how mentally ill offenders are being housed? And if conditions could be improved, are you able to weigh in on what challenges should be made?
I'm going to start by saying, Kelly, in the constituency of the consumers that we deal with, our goal, of course, is quick diversion out of court. We don't believe it's low-level crime. We do not believe that individuals with mental illnesses, quite frankly, should be in jail. That jail is inappropriate, and so ours is just leveraging, a court process to move people out of an inappropriate jail system into more appropriate conditions in the community. And I have, of course, toured jails. I've toured every kind of institutional facility you could imagine. And is there a way to do that? And make prisons or jails more humane? My comment to that is that individuals that shouldn't be in jails and prisons shouldn't be in jails and prisons. And I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe Debbie, you have a comment. Obviously, individuals who cannot get diverted out are entitled to, to treatment under constitutional standards. And we certainly have watched what's happening in California, with the downsizing of the prison population under Brown versus Plato. And I'm very excited about what's happened in California and Proposition 47. And I think, all eyes on California with, quite frankly, with the Medi-Cal. Because really, jails and prisons are quite, non-therapeutic for individuals with serious and persistent mental illnesses. And we know what happens in solitary confinement and administrative segregations. And we know that Human Rights Watch, has been very, very on top of this subject since their report in 2003, with ill-equipped, which quite frankly Human Rights Watch spent a number of days with us in Broward County. So these issues, are very, very important in terms of the abuse and the serious neglect that goes on in our nation's jails and prisons.
Ginger raised all of the right points. I too have toured many different types of facilities, and they are very, very different. So there's a big difference between a county jail, a state prison, and a federal prison. I want to reiterate what Ginger had said earlier, that while we are talking about folks with mental health conditions who have committed some crimes, that is, when we look at the overall who it is that commits crimes, when we have a Venn diagram of people who are violent, and it's a very small little piece where there's the overlap between mental illness and that crime. However, when folks get into jail who have mental health conditions, the conditions in jail, as she said, exacerbate illnesses. They tend to stay in for their entire sentence, if not having time added, because the practices and the culture of prisons can make it even more difficult with folks with mental health conditions. So again, that has to do with what type of jail it is. We have in many places where we have forensic peer specialists, people themselves who have experience having been in the jail, having had a mental health or substance use condition, who are able to go in there and work with people while they're inside. That makes a huge difference where we see that. That generally happens at the county and the state level.
Can you cite some places, Debbie, I'm sorry, that are doing that in-house work?
Oh, sure. Pennsylvania's doing it in a lot of places. New York is doing it. California is doing it. Here's the problem that we have. While I can cite some good examples, what we have are little pockets of excellence. We don't have any kind of continuum from locale to locale. So even within the same state, you might see it in a county, where a county contracts to train people and has a contract with a provider to come in and do forensic peer specialists. So it's very fragmented, unfortunately, and we don't have enough. But the good news is that we do really have some existing models that are quite excellent.
Alice.
Thanks. Thank you, Debbie and Ginger. We have another question. This one is for Graham Cates at CBS, and it's directed, I believe, to everybody. Question is, because the criminal justice system has such limited resources and mental health courts are not yet the status quo nationwide, are there specific changes the greater justice system should be making in order to improve its handling of suspects or defendants with mental health issues?
You know, I'm going to start, Graham. I think it's a great question, and I think that when you're working, what I've noticed, and I was just talking to a journalist, a friend of mine last night, when you're working in the area of criminal justice and mental health, the idea that somehow the criminal justice system is responsible for fixing what ails the mental health system, delivery system in the United States, to me, really should not be the focus. The focus should be where are our public health and mental health leaders, in lawmakers, policymakers, on the community side that are driving the mental health reform. Judges and jail, sheriffs and wardens and correction officers. We're not public health officers. We're not psychologists. We're not psychologists. I mean, the idea that I sit in my courtroom every day and I point to my robe and I'm doing all this therapeutic work. But I'm a judge. I went to law school. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. We have to shift the narrative. The narrative must shift, and that's where you all come in. The idea that, yes, you're covering all the atrocities, the injustices that flow from and based on the criminalization of people with mental illnesses, but that's not where the answers are. That's not, in my view, where the narrative must begin. The narrative and the questions must begin. Why are we not getting lawmakers to fund and prioritize mental health in our communities, in our states, in our counties? And we need that funding. We have to have these systems of care in order to prevent this flow into our nation's jails and prisons. I mean, this idea, and I'm holding up, the sequential map. Well, this sequential map, focuses on the criminal justice system. But I don't see, where's our county commission? Where's our legislators? Where's our governors? These are the people that we need to solve these problems. Is this sequential map great? Yes, but the sequential map needs to flow back to our lawmakers and our policymakers to really solve and heal what ails America in terms of mental health.
I couldn't agree more with Ginger. She's absolutely right. At Mental Health America, we talk about and we focus our policy and advocacy efforts on the fact that mental health conditions are the only illnesses, the only conditions that as a matter of public policy, we wait until what we consider to be stage 4 to pay attention to. And then our only treatments and our only recourse is the criminal justice system, as Ginger rightly pointed out. What we have to do, and the way we like to phrase it, is get to people before stage 4. So that is exactly as Ginger pointed out. That is the public health model. We need to start with prevention. Yes, we can prevent many of the mental health conditions that folks are dealing with. We can prevent trauma in communities. We can prevent substance use in communities. We can provide treatment. We can provide early intervention. What we need to be looking at, as Ginger rightfully points out, is a map that begins long before we get to this sequential intercept model. So it's the prevention, it's the early intervention, it's the integration of mental health into all of our health. Our entire health system looks at individuals, whole person, and whole communities. And that recovery is the goal of all of our interventions. By doing that, we hopefully can prevent people from needing the sequential intercept model. The first piece of the sequential intercept model that I mentioned most communities are doing with the police, well, we know that police often come when there's a medical emergency in all types of things. A heart attack, an ambulance comes, police come. But then it goes directly back into the community. That's the piece we need to be concentrating on. So police need to be trained. Oh, I recognize this, as well as citizens. Oh, I recognize this as a mental health issue if a person needs acute care, so then back into the community. But we also must be looking and dealing with all along before we reach crisis, and we keep cycling back into it.
Debbie, would you talk about, you had mentioned what California is doing in terms of sort of deep dive prevention. You had mentioned some juvenile work. Would you peel that back and also give a sense of who's watching this work in California?
Sure. I think the whole nation is watching the work in California. California has actually put its money where its mouth is. They have set aside dollars for dealing with children, for looking at families, for looking at schools. There's a lot more to be done. There are some other places that are doing it too. Some other states like Colorado is also putting its money where its mouth is, looking into prevention, looking into mother and child interventions, as is California. One of the things that we need to do, again, as a matter of public policy, is look at people in context, so that you know if you have folks who are at great risks for all kinds of health problems, and we know that the more stressors they deal with, the more kinds of adverse experiences they have, the more likely they are to have all kinds of health problems, especially substance use and mental health. But that's not all. So we need to be paying attention to that. We need to do it early. That's what California is doing. Colorado, New York is starting to do this. Connecticut just passed an amazing law where they call it their GAP law, where they start screening moms for postpartum depression. They look at moms and babies. New York has a great program in the Bronx out of Maimonides Hospital, where they're dealing with families, mostly moms and babes, where they know they're under a lot of stressors and they step right in. These are the kinds of things that will make a huge difference in keeping people from coming near the criminal justice system while addressing the public health needs.
Debbie, before we go on, can you just mention, because you're doing such a great job, the Excellence in Mental Health Act?
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you indeed. The Excellence in Mental Health Act is going to make a huge difference. So this is funding what are known as certified community behavioral health centers. And these are health centers that are not necessarily bricks and mortar, although they may be bricks and mortar, but they attend to whole communities wherever the people are, so that people are, there's a reach in to the community, attending to all their needs, sending workers out, bringing people in. I recommend to all the fellows that they become familiar with the certified community behavioral health centers. There's a pilot program that will be starting up. Various states have already put in their application for beginning this process. So we really feel very strongly that this could become the national model that will make a huge difference in diverting people away from the criminal justice system, and for folks who are coming out of the community, out of the criminal justice system. Very, very important to stop recidivism is to attend to people's health needs, make sure they have benefits coming out, and then the kinds of health homes and certified community behavioral health centers are going to what makes the difference to having whole person, whole needs in the community where people can come to and the services can come to the people.
Sure. Before we sort of let y'all do your wrap up and give your suggested story ideas, Judge Ginger, I wanted to ask you, I know a number of states that have at this juncture not officially opted for the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion, are sort of legislators trying to surreptitiously get those dollars without saying they're for Obamacare. What's happening in Florida, and how are y'all managing as an
Thank you, Patty, for asking, because we're not, I mean, I just wish I had a word, maybe, you know, that could really capture, you know, the critical nature of what's happening in the state of Florida. We have been at 49th, depending upon how you do the math. The state of Florida does not provide their data to Kaiser Permanente, which actually provides the national ranking. So you kind of have to do a backdoor review just to try to find where we are. But the last data check I did, we are $39.55 per capita in the state of Florida. If you look at the math, what is that, like 7 grand lattes at Starbucks? I mean, you know, per person for mental health funding in this state. We have a huge, diverse population. We have a tremendous amount of seniors. We have people from all over, a number of immigrants, people with no health insurance, and large pockets, of course, of poverty. We are the gateway. We've been the gateway for synthetic designer drugs. Flacco, Broward County, of course, has been featured on CBS because we've had the highest deaths. And we have, unfortunately, a legislature that is not publicly health-minded. We are I can't really capture why the Florida's legislature has really, with all due respect, been tin-eared to the advocates in the state of Florida, and we are really, 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 you know, underwater here in terms of our healthcare delivery and mental health.
Thank you for that. So if each of you would give your sort of parting remarks, specifically citing necessary areas of coverage, stuff that hasn't been covered, stuff that isn't covered correctly as you see it. We try to leave the fellows with some parting story ideas, no matter where they are working in the country.
I'd like to jump in. I'd like to follow up with what Ginger said about access. Access is really the key. And all across the southern states in particular, they're the states that have not expanded Medicaid, it's very important in those states. I've been working with a lot of journalists in the state, with a lot of legislators and advocates in the states, that we talk about access rather than expansion. But when we talk about it, we can talk about it in economic terms, how we keep folks in school, how that saves money, how that keeps people out of the criminal justice system, how it keeps people away from substance use, how it makes the workforce more productive, how it saves tax dollars. We can explore stories from that point of view. But I think the most important thing right now is for the journalists, while they talk about access, to also disabuse the public of the notion that mental health equals equals criminal justice equals violence. We're talking today about criminal justice because of our failed policies, that we wait until stage 4, we treat people only in criminal justice. So we need to stop doing that by disabusing people of the idea that people are inherently violent. Again, I will reiterate, what is the only predictor of violence is previous violence, not mental illness. We have to be careful, even when there has been previous violence, have the issues been attended to, and then we can reduce. And the way we reduce all of the health needs and all of the costs across the board for all social service, including criminal justice, is we attend to people's health, and we do it from that public health standpoint.
Judge?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Debbie very, very much. I also think that there is just not been an accurate portrayal of individuals with mental illnesses. The people that I see in my court are professionals. I've had engineers and nurses and professional artists and accountants and teachers, and you name it. These are everybody. The data is very clear. 1 in 5 American adults is going to suffer from some kind of serious mental illness in any given year. And where there is untreated mental illness, where access is a problem, for example, or social stigma acts as a barrier, or finance acts as a barrier, negative things happen. And incarceration is just one example of a negative consequence. What about suicide? What about family erosion? What about, homelessness? What about deeper and worsening, conditions? What about chronic medical conditions that worsen as a result of toxic stress? What about the collateral consequences to our children of parents who are unable to access mental health? So you can see the snowball that keeps growing and cascading when we don't actually report truths, that there are fundamental truths surrounding mental health that are not being recorded. Number 1, treatment works. Number 2, people recover. They get well. They go back to work. They go back to college, like my dear friend Catherine. They go on. They have lives. They fall in love. They have children. This is the face of recovery and what mental illness looks like. It looks like any other physical type medical disease or problem. And so I really think that a restructuring of an individual's viewpoint of what it is that you're covering, how you're portraying individuals, and what recovery looks like. When Demi Lovato came to Capitol Hill for Hill Day, for National Council, for example, the press, couldn't have covered her more because she was just, gorgeous and talented and authentic and well-spoken. But the truth is, there's millions of Demi Lovatos out in the world who are gorgeous and fantastic and talented and vibrant and authentic. And so we really need to understand that this is what needs to be portrayed, and that access to care equals health, and that well-being is the standard that all Americans are really entitled to. And I think that's the narrative, that I really would like to read more about.
Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, Catherine Steves, and Debbie Plotnick. Thank you so much. Alice, thank you for running the backside. Thank you, fellows. I will be sharing the contact information for all 3 of our experts today with you. Please look at the links that the judge sent. And to the 3 of you, I will also be sending you email addresses of our fellows. We are always looking for stories and try to make this a 2-way engagement. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.